Welcome, everyone, to episode 102 of the Talking Friars podcast. Ben Fadden, your host here today with Kevin Charity of MadFriars. Kevin, thanks so much for hopping on. We'll get right into it, kind of just talking about the Padres farm system and kind of the future of, the big Padres prospects. There's been some, viewers that have wanted me to talk some prospects, so you're a perfect guy to do it with.
Thanks for having me.
Let's first start off with Keith Law's list that he put out today. We're recording this on a Monday. This will go out probably on a Wednesday. What did you think of the Padres going 15th on that list?
I think it's probably about right. I think when you look at the other major publications, I know Baseball America kind of had him at the back end of like the top 20, I think like 19 or 20. I don't really follow this every system as closely as I do the Padres system, obviously. Otherwise, I would never have any free time. But I think it's accurate. I think what you're seeing is with every publication, ours included, and the other national guys that I think do this more as a full-time thing. I think what you've seen is that there's like generally the big four, which is obviously the Abrams, Hassell, Campusano, and Gore in some type of order. And then after that, everything kind of falls off, or falls in line, I should say. So yeah, I think middle of the pack system for what you've seen, middle to like middle end is probably accurate based on what I've seen as well. So I would tend to agree with that. I think he's a little bit more bullish than some of the other publications are.
Yeah, I also think what's interesting about it is with the Padres being, middle of the pack, 15th, you could say, well, they probably should be if they're trying to go win a World Series right now. But with that said, the Dodgers are also in that same spot, and they're number one. The Rays are in that spot, and they're in, I think, the top 5. So there's just different opinions, different viewpoints that you could, take away from the list. I guess my question is, do you think the Padres should be higher, not based on the farm system that they have, but just Preller, how he's viewed as an evaluator? Should they have, I guess, more talent even after the trades that they made? Because even the Dodgers have traded away their top 2 prospects, and they're still sitting at number 1.
I think too, the Padres, it's just by volume, the guys they traded. I think when you combine major league and minor league guys, like between 2020 and when the lockout was instituted, they traded, I think, over 40 younger players, something like that, right? And so guys like Taylor Trammell, Cal Quantrill wasn't really a prospect, but, guys like that are really good young players were moved to get other pieces. Now, whether or not you want to say those are the right moves, that's obviously up for debate. But I think kind of all things considered, I think like farm systems are cyclical. And I think the Dodgers, they traded like Tybert Ruiz, and they traded, I think, Josiah Gray, or the players they moved in the Turner and Scherzer deal, but they have a lot of really good young players too. And the Padres moved out a ton. Yeah, I mean, preferably you would like to see them maybe in a better position to have a better system than they do. But I think having another draft coming up, the international class, hasn't really gotten to the point where that's been evaluated yet and hasn't factored in. But I think all things considered, if you're like middle of the pack farm system, and you like your major league roster, I don't think that's a bad place to be in. I still think they have enough ammunition, so to speak, to go out and acquire big league players should they want to. But I don't think they're in a bad position by any means. I'd be a lot more worried if they were like 30 or 25 to 30. But I think middle of the pack, considering everything they've done, I think you're okay with that.
Mm-hmm. My last episode was on trades. If I could undo one trade that AJ's made in his tenure as Padres GM, which would it be? And I picked the Ty France Trammell deal. I didn't like him. If you're gonna trade Fran Mill and then you give up on Trammell that early, not even playing a full minor league season, and you give up on Ty France, and obviously with the injuries and with Altavia and Nola and Adams hitting every second guy, it seemed like that trade, it could work out, but it just seems like it hasn't. And I was a big fan of Trammell. I'll ask the same question to you. Which trade would you undo if you had one trade that you could?
It's a really good question. I'm inclined to pick that trade as well. I think there's a couple that stand out. I think at MadFriars, I was always one of the higher guys, if not the highest guy in Quantrill. And so giving up Quantrill, who's turned into, I know his like secondary stats weren't as promising as what the overall results were last year, but that trade where you gave up just a ton for essentially 1 year of Mike Clevenger, who's going to be coming off an injury, that one's tough. Not that I think that was a bad deal at the time, because at the time I thought it was, I was super, I'm excited about it. And that's, before we knew that, Clevenger was going to blow out his arm and miss all of last year. Because having 2 years plus of control of him would have been fantastic. But yeah, I think when you look at that trade, you gave up, it was one of those classic deals where you traded from your depth, where you gave up France, who really had no place to play for the Padres, but it's turned into, he was like a 4-1 player last year, and turned into a really solid middle of the order hitter. He's the kind of hitter that they should be trying to add right now when you look at their roster. And then giving up Munoz, who's the guy in that deal I was the most oh man, I wish they didn't give him up, because I think he's got potential to be a closer. And then you throw in Trammell on top of that, and then Nola's been fine when he's been on the field, but I think that trade, if your roster looks a lot different if you have Ty France in the middle of your order, whether it's a DH or at first or wherever you want to do with him, or try to play him in left, whatever it is. I don't think he's a left fielder, but looking at his bat, he'd profile right perfect into that lineup. Give them, a right-handed alternative to Hosmer. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the trade that I do, with the Clevenger deal being probably a fairly distant second.
And we haven't even mentioned Luis Torrens, who stayed healthier than Nola. And
that's true. That's a really good point.
4 times the amount of home runs that Nola has hit. And he's not even been the starter in Seattle. So, yeah. There's a lot of trades. Some of the readers on Gaslight Ball, which I write for, we were talking about the Trey Turner deal, but then I was like, yeah, but they have Tatis now and Cronenworth, so it doesn't make it as bad. Myers was an all-star at one point. Giving up Zach Eflin hurt as well. But so there's a lot of different ways that, different trades that Preller's made that haven't worked out.
There's a lot of bad trades.
Yeah. But then there's also some with Tatis and Cronenworth and Grisham and Musgrove.
Right.
And hopefully Snell and Darvish that have worked out. So I guess it's one of those still kind of wait and sees, and one that kind of can update at some point in the future. Let's move a little bit to the lockout. The owner's supposed to meet Tuesday through Thursday this week. The 40-man roster players right now, they can't communicate with their teams. So like MacKenzie Gore, Ray Kerr, I believe, Adrian Martinez, Steven Wilson, Eggy Rosario, those guys come to mind for me. All can't be like coached up by the new coaching staff right now. Do you view that as, like a big negative, or is that kind of being overblown?
I think it's a colossal negative. And I don't think it's overblown at all. Maybe for some of the guys on that list. Steven Wilson to me is already like big league ready, so I don't know how much that's going to impact him. But a guy like Gore, who, at the end of 2019, before the pandemic shut everything down, like he was hands down the best pitcher in minor league baseball, and it wasn't even close. Every prospect list had him number 1 prospect pitching wise in baseball. I don't think that if you can go back to 2019, look at like Baseball America Handbook, Baseball Prospectus, Keith Law, who might have been in ESPN, whatever it was, consensus. And so then you fast forward, obviously the pandemic year took out a lot last year. He fell completely out of BA's 100. And so I think having that guy who obviously has some is having command issues. They did a huge change with his windup, his mechanics. To not have him ready to go at big league camp, working with Ruben Nieva and some of their coordinators, even if it was just on the minor league side, where you could like theoretically option him to AAA and let him work with I can't remember who the pitching coach is in AAA, but Pete Zamora, who's been in the organization for a long time, is really well regarded. And some of the other arms, I think it's a major disadvantage, because you have a guy who essentially he lost a full year, and there's obviously been issues with his performance and everything. It's something I have actually put on Twitter. It's a huge major concern of mine, because he's like the one guy in their farm system. And you can obviously can't be Sano too. I think it's not a great thing for him either. But for Gore, who this is really a pivotal year, it's his first year where he really has a chance to contribute at the big league level. He's on the 40-man roster. To not have him in camp here in like a week or whatever it would start is concerning for me. It's a huge concern.
Now, if spring training doesn't start on time, the minor league camp is still going to happen. So does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that means that, like you mentioned, Gore could theoretically be optioned to AAA, but is there any scenario where that like actually happens and you see guys? You see guys on the 40-man end up going like because there's no transactions that can happen right now. That's the thing.
Yeah. Right? Unless they change the rules or do something. No, I mean when you're on the 40-man roster, like you're locked out of anything that's has to do with this. So like guys, like Robert Hassell or CJ Abrams, they're not on the 40-man roster. So minor league camp typically starts at the beginning of March. They start playing games kind of in the middle of March, and then they break camp, and their season's supposed to start, I think, around April 8th. So, like, all those guys that are not on the 40-man roster can do whatever they want in the minor leagues. But there's not a scenario unless, like, again, something changes where they can option Gore, option Eggy Rosario, or Steven Wilson to AAA. So, like, what's going to happen is the AAA roster is essentially going to be comprised of I would imagine you're probably going to see a run of minor league free agents, not just the Padres organizations, but a lot of organizations, because there's a lot of, obviously if you have a full 40-man roster, that means 14 guys that are on your active 40-man are going to be in the minor leagues because of, 26-man rosters. So if those guys aren't in there in AAA, then then you're going to see that. But I wish there was a scenario where there was guys with no big league experience or very little experience where they could go to camp, but that until something happens on that front, that's not the case. And I think that's a really big disadvantage for a guy like Gore. It's really maybe I'm overblowing it. I think it's massive personally, and that's my personal belief. But some may say it's not that big of a deal. Hopefully, I'm sure they obviously there was a lockout coming, and they probably have some type of plan that they're on. But I mean, it's almost kind of like we're back in the COVID season where it's kind of a free for all, where you just kind of work on your own and hope that when it's time that you're ready to go.
Yeah, and sticking with Gore, what's the latest that you've heard about him? We've heard that his mechanics have gotten better in the fall league, and then there was a little bit of a dip again. What's the latest on him?
I mean, what you saw in the Arizona Fall League was kind of uneven. Like his first start, he looked really good. Second start, his mechanics got, from what I've read, obviously wasn't there, but that they kind of suffered a little bit. And that's been the biggest issue with him, is that part of what makes him so special, or made him so special, when he was drafted in the first years of his system, is he's got four pitches, three of them could, be plus with great command. His command, like if you watch him in All-Star in 2019, he would pitch off his fastball. Just his command, he could locate it to every part of the plate, would get ahead of guys, and he'd bury him with one of his off-speed pitches. And that's how he pitched. I mean, a lot of times in Elsinore, when you saw him, he only had two pitches working, but it was his fastball and one of the off-speed pitches. And so obviously when you lose the ability to command the fastball, now you're in AAA where you're against guys with big league experience, or guys that have been in the pros for multiple years and are still really, really good players. They're not big league players, but they're still really good players. I think the inability where he would just miss his spots. And, what I saw from him, at least in his first couple of starts, is he'd miss up a lot in the zone. So I'm not sharp enough to really break it down. And so you can see all the changes in his mechanics as what caused that. But they try to smooth out his delivery. They try to make it a little bit less chaotic, because his delivery is really complex. And I think the fear with it is that when he got older in age, it'd be hard to repeat, because it is such an athletic ability, or an athletic windup. But from what we've seen, it was kind of uneven. But I think Keith Law made a point in his chat today, and it's kind of the same point I have, is the stuff isn't diminished. His ability to throw strikes has. And so if you still like the stuff, you still see a left-handed pitcher that can touch 96, 97, sit 93 to 95 with a plus breaking, plus curveball, plus changeup, you still see all the components for a really good pitcher. And so I guess there's really no news on him, but I think what I'm hoping for is that whenever spring training starts, or whenever he can get in there, which hopefully, I mean, there's a season, I have no idea what to expect, that he can get in there and be a really good option for the Padres at some point, because as you saw last year, you can never have too many starters, and they're going to need 10, 11, 12 guys to get to the season, and he's going to need to be a big part of that.
what's at some point for you? Like, because it's really weird, like, because like you mentioned, the ups, the downs for him, you just don't really know what we're gonna see. He hasn't worked with Ruben Nieva much, because of the lockout, or any coach for that matter, because he's on the 40-man. I mean, it's just hard to imagine that he's on the big league roster in the first half of the year.
Yeah, I mean, let's just assume they get everything worked out and they're able to start the season on time. I don't think there's a scenario, especially with what you saw, that what they brought in, depth wise, what they have coming back from injury. I mean, your rotation right now is pretty much set, I would think, with Darvish, Snell, Clevenger, and some of the other guys they have. And then you have like depth options. You don't know what you're going to get with Lamet. They signed or they were in agreement with Nick Martinez. It was not official. You still have Weathers. I think all those guys you'd put ahead on the depth chart of Gore. I mean, Gore, even Adrian Martinez with El Paso, who was with El Paso last year, might be higher than him on the depth chart. So you're looking at a guy who maybe in your best case scenario is maybe your 9th or 10th best starting option. But, while that sounds like kind of discouraging for him, you're going to probably need that guy. You look at some of the guys that started for the Padres down the stretch, Jake Arrieta, Vincent Velasquez, a few other guys. You don't know what you're going to need. It's kind of like I kind of equated it to the Padres being one of those teams that has to start like their 5th string quarterback, the guy they had to sign off the scrap heap, like the Josh Johnson rule, who he always seems to end up starting for some NFL team because injuries happen. He's kind of in that depth piece world, but I still feel like he's going to be a good big league pitcher. I would have bet that he turns into a frontline starter 2 years ago. I'm probably not as bullish, but yeah, I think he's still very important to the future of this team. And, if you look at the Padres system right now, they don't really have, in my opinion, with maybe the exception of like Susana, who they just signed, they don't have anybody, a prospect in their system that projects to be a top of the rotation arm, in my opinion. They have a bunch of guys that are really good that maybe are like mid-rotation guys, but if you want to go where the Padres want to go and you want to have this window stay open for a while, you're going to need him. And I'm still optimistic, but yeah, obviously my concern level was like 0 in 2019. And now it's pretty high.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense to be.
Yeah. I mentioned Ruben Nieva a little earlier. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what really how much influence can Ruben have on Gore?
I don't know. That remains to be seen. I think the good news is what you've seen is that when he got hired away from Cleveland, there was a lot of people inside baseball and inside the organization that were really disappointed by that. And you look at Cleveland's been on a pretty good run of been able to develop starting pitchers. Shane Bieber, Quantrill looked like a new pitcher. And after that acquisition, they've always been able to kind of piece together a really good rotation despite not having a lot of resources, i.e. payroll. And so I think when you look around baseball and see what the reaction is to the Padres hiring him, it was universally positive. I didn't see anything negative. I think it's maybe overblown that people are expecting him to be like the savior and he's going to turn MacKenzie Gore into Clayton Kershaw. I think that's a little bit crazy. But I think he could definitely help out. I mean, for whatever reason, last year things didn't jive on. Again, I don't know if it's a coaching thing. There's been questions about their PD, and obviously the Padres had those questions because they made a lot of changes in the player development. With getting a new farm director and changing out coordinators and stuff. But I definitely think it's a huge positive. And yeah, you want that guy who's helped develop a lot of really good big league pitchers to work with a guy that you feel like is your best prospect, your best young pitcher. And so, yeah, I was really looking forward to that dynamic of seeing him come out this spring and just kind of looking like the Gore of old. And again, having that guy in your system and having that guy ready to start big league games would be massive. But I think it would be a positive impact. But I think for people that think that Niebla was going to come in and be a savior or something to that effect is a little premature. But yeah, I'm looking forward to at some point him getting to work with a new staff, maybe teach him some different things, maybe clean up a few things. But I think sometimes when we look at things, everybody always goes to the extreme. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like, I think he's going to have a positive effect, though.
Yeah. Now, CJ Abrams obviously had the MCL injury, unfortunately, last year. He's going to be full go for minor league camp.
Mm-hmm. That's what we've heard. I think he's got a clear bill of health. And so the expectation is whenever they start up, I don't know the exact date when they report, beginning of March, that he'll be full board, ready to go, and ready to to kind of resume his career.
And are they still playing him as a shortstop, middle infielder, and just seeing how the Hosmer situation pans out before they try him in the outfield?
Yeah, I mean, he mostly played shortstop when he did play in San Antonio last year. He played second a little bit. Obviously, if you believe that Tatis is the long term at short, which he's got 13 years left on his deal, and he's made it clear he wants to be a shortstop. There's obviously not really a room for CJ to play short. Aside from maybe giving Tatis a rest here and there and letting him DH, assuming there's a DH. But yeah, he's probably going to be second base. He hasn't played outside of the infield yet. There are a lot of talks about it because given his athleticism and his speed and his instincts, he probably would adapt really well to like center field. But as of right now, I would think that when the season opens up, he's probably your second baseman in San Antonio would be my guess.
And how fast do you think he could move up the system this year? Like, do you see a September situation or before that?
Assuming he's healthy, I think that's plausible. I think the thing with CJ that kind of really stinks is that, he was drafted in 19, got his at-bats in the AZL, got hurt at the end of the season and kind of missed his cameo at Fort Wayne. Pandemic happens, and then last year happens. So he's only amassed about 350 or so plate appearances. And so, you want to kind of see him get a full year of at-bats, but assuming he goes to, and my assumption is he starts in Double-A, but I mean, I wouldn't be a shock to see him go to Triple-A. I like to see him get like 400, 450 plate appearances, which would obviously put him in line with September. I think that's definitely plausible. I don't think he's ready to contribute to the big league team yet, just because he just needs to get more at bats. But he's a guy, he's my number one prospect in the system. He's got elite, bat to ball skills, his athleticism, his speed, all that. He's got everything you want. I think he's going to hit for a little bit of power. I don't think he's going to turn into like Ken Griffey Jr. or, Nelson Cruz or anything like that. But I think he's a guy that could hit 15, 20 homers a year with his speed, with his ability to get on base. I mean, that's a special player. And yeah, I think they look at him like that too. So
yeah, same thing about Hassell. Where do you see him ending up? I know that there's been, some trade. Padres Twitter talks about, do you attach Hassell to a Hosmer deal? But let's just focus on he stays in the Padres organization, assuming that. Do you see him kind of being slightly behind Abrams in the track up the minor league system?
Yeah, I mean, he was drafted the year after CJ, right, obviously. So I think last year went honestly about as well as it could go. He went to Elsinore, got off to a little bit of a slow start, but like in May he was really good, and by like July or August, but I think he was promoted the last day of the last day of August. I believe that's correct. And by like July, August, it was clear that you were watching a guy that was too good for that level. I mean, his strikeout rates were almost like non-existent. He was getting on base at a 500 clip. And he went to Fort Wayne, and in the second or third game that he was there, he hit 3 home runs in a game. Didn't really perform much outside of that, struggled a little bit, which is to not really be, it's not surprising because that was his first full professional season, and, he was at the high A level. But I think he's very similar to Abrams, in which I think they're both going to be guys that hit for high average, high on base with, probably not like elite level power. But the thing with Hassell that I really liked is this guy plays an awesome center field. He's got a really good arm. And if you watch Hassell, especially when he was with Elsinore, is he rarely goes outside of the strike zone to swing at pitches. I mean, I know the Padres have worked really hard and have emphasized plate discipline and chase rates. And so when he would strike out, it would be a lot of like pitches he was looking at because he was not going to chase and go outside the zone. I think that having that recognition, what I would say is better than average, it's pretty elite. Having that for a guy his age is really special, and I think he's got a chance to be a really big part of this Padres future, and I'm very high on him. Obviously, I think Abrams is a little bit closer. And I think Abrams probably has a little bit better tool set, but honestly, for me, like I put Gore as number, or I'm sorry, I put Abrams as 1, Hassell as 2 in my list. I don't think the gap is that wide at all.
That's good news for Padres fans then, based on projections of, what Abrams and Hassell are, supposed to do. Now, Mike Shildt was hired, player development role, and he's kind of working with the commissioner's office as well. So I'm not so sure how consistent he's going to, be around the team. But what do you think do you have anything on his timeline, his schedule for the Padres and what he could, bring if it's on the minor league side or if it's on the player development side for the big league club in spring training? Like, what do you think he'd bring?
I mean, I don't know specifically what his role entails. That really hasn't really been made super public that I'm aware of. But I think having a guy in the organization that came from the Cardinals, and you look at what happened last year with them. He helped them get on that run, and it was kind of, they more or less ended the Padres season with that 3-game sweep in St. Louis in September, and he's been a winning manager. I know that the part that would concern me a little bit with him is kind of like his poo-pooing on analytics a little bit. I think you heard some of that talk last year. I don't know how much of a big deal that is, but the Padres, with Preller haven't been an overly analytic front office anyway. And that's obviously been publicized, but I think anytime you can add a guy with his pedigree to your system and have him have any imprint in whether it's the big league roster or the farm system, I think it's a really solid positive. And I think that was one of the things I saw when they announced their staff a couple of weeks ago, was just seeing him on there. I think that was a really, really good move for a guy that, I believe at one time was the candidate for their manager job. And I think we'll probably get a manager opportunity again, be it next year or in the future. So yeah, it's a great thing for the organization, in my opinion.
Yeah. Last one here. Can you give me a little bit on this year's international signing class? Obviously the Susana kid, and then you got one from Cuba, from Mexico, obviously signed more guys. It seemed like a pretty, obviously, high upside type class. What can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I know that Susana to me is the prize. It's kind of funny because it seemed like it was really light on pitchers this year. I think that most of the publications had Susana as the number 1 arm, where there was like 30 position players that were ranked ahead of him. So it's obviously a position heavy class, but to come away with a pitcher like him that has the ability to potentially throw 4 pitches, and obviously it's really difficult to project a 16-year-old of what they're going to be in 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it being, but getting him into the system. And they don't really have, they have, when you look at like their top 30, at least, my top 30 is they have guys like Ethan Elliott, Robert Gasser, Adrian Martinez, and even like Moises Lugo, who was in Fort Wayne last year. They're pretty good arms, but don't really project to be top of the rotation. They're going to be solid, maybe your 3s or your 4s. So to add a guy that, again, we don't know what we're going to get. He may be Idis Portillo, who they signed, I want to say like 12 or 13 years ago, that they gave a big bonus to, at the time was the biggest bonus in club history. And he never got above high A. And you don't know what you're going to get with a lot of international guys, but a guy that is already throwing 96, 97 as a 17-year-old that, has the ability to touch 100 with wipeout breaking stuff. And they're talking, this guy could have 4+ pitches. I think that for me was the biggest win, because they don't have a guy like that in the system. I think the Cuban kid, his name escapes me at the moment, but both those guys are like hit first prospects that both have tools. I know he's projected to stay, probably like second base or third base, or maybe move to left. The rest of the guys, I know they signed a kid out of the Bahamas. that has really good athleticism. So I think getting, the Padres approach after 2016, at least the last three classes where they could spend and not have a cap in terms of the amount they can give every player. Obviously, there's a hard cap in it now, but they've really tried to spread it around. Whereas you've seen like the Yankees go big for like Jason Dominguez, and the Nationals did that. The Padres approach has been able to spread it around a little bit more, bringing guys like Precadio and Victor Acosta last year. But I think for this class, it's really exciting to get a guy like Susana. I don't know. Again, it's really difficult to project these guys, but I think anytime you can add those guys, I think Susana, if everything goes right, could be a top 10 prospect in the system next year, and have that frontline projection. And that was to me by far the most exciting addition to their system.
Yeah. All right. This has been fun. Episode 102 of the Talking Friars podcast. You can check out Kevin Charity MadFriars, Ben Fadden, the host here. Thanks so much for doing this, Kevin.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, man. Thanks.
All right. Until next time, everyone, let's go Padres and stay safe.